What is ASP.NET? ASP.NET is a server-side technology used for developing dynamic websites and web applications on the internet. It also produces data-driven web application. Microsoft released ASP.NET in 2002 to build dynamic websites and web applications using the .NET framework. What platform does ASP.NET use? ASP.NET is a cross-platform which works on the .NET framework and runs on Linux, Windows, Mac OS and Docker. What is the ASP.NET lifecycle and list the types of lifecycle? When ASP.NET pages run, it goes through several steps of the lifecycle, which performs a series of actions like initialization, running, restoring and rendering. Lifecycle is classified into two categories: application lifecycle and page lifecycle. In application lifecycle, the user requests for accessing the application. Page lifecycle has phases like initialization, restoring, execution, and page rendering. What is MVC? So MVC is basically a software architectural pattern that divides an application into three main parts, that is model, view, and controller. Model helps to create the data domain of the application and represents the public properties and business logic of the application. View represents the data tables, charts, and diagrams by collecting the data from the model. Controller. The controller helps in handling the user interactions and controls the flow of the application. List the languages used for ASP.NET. ASP.NET uses object-oriented programming languages that provide a framework and patterns which are easy to use. Languages used by ASP.NET framework are C# or VB.NET. C# is a programming language developed by Microsoft that runs on the .NET framework. It is used for developing web applications on the .NET framework. VB.NET is a modern object-oriented programming language developed by Microsoft to combine the features of CLR and .NET. What type of library is used in ASP.NET? A library is a pre-coded object-oriented programming template collection used to develop web-based and desktop applications in ASP.NET. ASP.NET uses a web library to develop web applications. What is CLR? CLR is the basic common language runtime virtual machine component of the .NET framework used to run the code. It manages the executing .NET programs and implements a virtual execution system internally. Services that CLR provide are verification, garbage collection, security, and memory management. What is IIS and why do you use it? Internet Information Server (IIS) is the most popular web server used to host and provide internet-based services to ASP.NET and ASP web applications. IIS has its own process engine to handle the request. Using an IIS computer, one can work as a web server and provides functionally to deploy ASP.NET web applications. It is also responsible for providing responses to the requests made by the users. List the types of application lifecycle. Application lifecycle is of 5 types: application start, object creation, HTTP application, dispose, and application end. Application start is a method that you execute when a user makes a request. Object creation contains all the information about current request and browsing information. HTTP application processes all subsequent requests sent to the application. Dispose is responsible for releasing manually unwanted resources. Application end helps to unload the memory of an application. List the advantages of using ASP.NET. ASP.NET is a development framework that is used for developing web applications. It is one of the most preferred web development technologies at present. There are a lot of benefits of using ASP.NET. Here are some of its advantages. Applications created using ASP.NET show better performance. ASP.NET provides multi-development modes for the applications. Applications created using ASP.NET can be used across the globe. ASP.NET is a language independent. What is an active server page? Active server page is an HTML page used to develop dynamic web pages. It includes one or more scripts on the Microsoft web server before sending the request to the user. ASP was first released in December 1996. It is used to generate the content that is sent to the client web browser via the HTTP response. Describe web forms. Web forms are web pages that a user requests using a browser. It is built using ASP.NET technology. It executes on the server and generates output to the browser. It also allows you to add and create custom controls. Some of the custom controls provided by ASP.NET are label, text box, button, hyperlink, and image button. What is a Solution Explorer? Solution Explorer displays the folder and files of a project that appears on a physical hard drive. List the components of ASP.NET. ASP.NET provides data-driven web applications on the internet using various components. Some of the components are Common Language Runtime, Language, Library, Common Type System, and Windows Forms. What is the difference between ASP and ASP.NET? ASP is the first server-side scripting language developed by Microsoft to design dynamic web forms, whereas ASP.NET is a server-side technology used for developing dynamic websites and web applications on the internet. ASP uses ADO, that is ActiveX Data Objects, to connect with the database, whereas ASP.NET uses ADO.NET to connect with the database. ASP is written in VB script. ASP.NET is written in C#. What type of protocol is used to call web service? Web service is a web-based functionality accessed by using protocols. It uses XML to exchange the software using common internet protocols. Web service in ASP.NET has three aspects. They are creating web service, creating a proxy, consuming the web service. The HTTP protocol is used in ASP.NET to call a web service. Explain uses of global.asax. Global file is used to execute the application level events and set application level variables. Global.asax is used to handle high-level applications like application start, session end, and session start. Now let us look at some of the intermediate level ASP.NET interview questions and answers. What is a web library? Web library is a part of a website that accesses all libraries from the browser and helps in adding collections online. It contains base and user-defined data types. It supports to create web services. Describe a view state. View state is a page-level state management technique that is used to preserve the values of the page and controls. View state contains the sections like features, background, scenario, and class reference. What is a multi-view? Multi-view is a parent control for the view. It is used to control all types of the view. Multi-view has the prefix MV. This is the syntax of multi-view. What is early binding? Early binding is used to check the methods and properties during compilation. It is fast and easy to code and also reduces the compilation time. It also reduces the time by identifying the errors. What is late binding? Late binding takes more time to compile. It is hard to find out the object through late binding. Late binding has dynamic objects and is achieved by virtual machines. How ASP.NET is different from ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET is used to build applications for Windows, whereas ASP.NET Core is used for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. ASP.NET uses .NET Framework, whereas ASP.NET Core uses .NET Core Framework. ASP.NET is a single version. ASP.NET Core has multiple versions. What is caching? Caching is a technique used to sort the user data or information in memory. It boosts the performance of the applications and creates pages automatically. Caching is also essential for data-related transactions. What is the role of page directives? Page directives describe the attributes of specific page file for the compiler. Below is the syntax of page directives, where code file specifies the name of code behind the file, and debug enables or specifies compilation debug, and client name specifies the class name of the page, and the client target browsers the server controls. List the types of states in ASP.NET. State in ASP.NET is used to store the information between request and to retrieve it when required and holding the information. ASP.NET provides 4 types of states: application state, cookie state, view state, and session state. Application state. In this state, all collections of web pages and files in a single directory on a web server. Cookie state. It stores the information on the client machine. View state states the state of web pages and its control. Session state. This state is used to sort the application data. List the sources of data allowed by ASP.NET. Data sources are responsible for operations like insertion, deletion, sorting, and updates. Some of the data sources allowed by ASP.NET are SQL data source, object data source, and access data source. List the events of calendar control. Calendar control is a function used to provide a calendar on a web page. It also enables you to change and move to the previous months and years. The events of calendar control are of 3 types: selection changed, day render, and visible month changed. What is a trace? Tracing enables view diagnostic information about a single request at runtime and debug the application. The trace contains features, backgrounds, code examples, and class references. How can we add a style sheet in Visual Studio? To add a style sheet, open Solution Explorer and right-click on the option, then click on New, and a pop-up will appear to choose. How can a page layout help in ASP.NET? Page layout provides an overall container for the pages on the website. For example, navigation area and footer. Page layout also includes the main event. List the advantages of using HTML server controls. HTML server controls are the standard HTML controls used to enable server-side processing. Some of the advantages of using HTML server controls are: HTML server control does not possess any mechanism to identify the capabilities of a client browser. Coding can be easy by adding run@= server attribute. Controls can interact with the client-side scripting. Explain about event bubbling. Event bubbling is used by data-bound controls. When a parent control contains child controls, and when an event occurs in the child controls, it bubbles the event to the parent. This is called event bubbling. Event bubbling is classified into 2 categories: on-bubble event that handles the event data, rise bubble event that sends the event data. List the most common built-in objects of ASP.NET. Built-in objects access the information from the web server. It is also responsible for recognizing the client who is accessing the web page. Some of the commonly built-in objects of ASP.NET are context, application, request, server, trace, and response. List types of caching. Caching is a technique used to sort the user data or information in memory. Caching is divided into three types. Output caching, it specifies the duration of cache and the attribute. Fragment caching, it is user-controlled caching used in a basic web form page. Data caching, it is used for caching the data of the data source controls. What are breakpoints? Breakpoint helps to specify the runtime to run a line and stop the execution. It is used to examine and perform various debugging functions and methods. Now let us look at some of the advanced level interview questions. List any 5 web controls in ASP.NET. Web controls are HTML elements used for script tagging and functionality for web forms and pages. The 5 web controls in ASP.NET are as follows: HTML controls, HTML server controls, user and custom controls, ASP.NET server controls, ASP.NET AJAX server controls. What are button controls? Button controls in ASP.NET are used to display a push button on a web page. This is the syntax for button controls, where you provide button ID and run at server, and the text is of the type button. What is range validator and its syntax? Range validator checks the input values that lie in between the specified ranges. Range validator has 3 main properties, that is type, minimum value, and maximum value. This is the syntax of range validator, wherein we have provided minimum value as 1 and maximum value as 6, and it is of the type integer. What is a thread priority? In multithreading, each thread has its own priority that gains access to CPU resources. Whenever a thread is created in C#, it always possesses some priority. It is mainly used to set a value. What is the role of postback in ASP.NET? Postback is a request sent from a client to the server from the page on which the user is working. It posts the complete page back to the server for a new page. Postback is submitted to a server before processing the page and holds credentials such as verification like username and password using a database. List the types of authentication in ASP.NET. Authentication is a process of ensuring the user identity. It is divided into 4 types: form authentication, Windows authentication, custom authentication, and passport authentication. Define web configuration. Web configuration is used to describe the property and behavior of web applications. It also helps to manage settings. Each file of a web configuration is an XML file that contains a set of configuration elements. Explain client-side script events. Client-side script runs on the browser and speeds up the execution of the page. Some of the client-side events are as follows. On click, it is used when the control is clicked. On focus, it is used when control receives the focus. On change is used when the value of control is changed. On blur is used when the control loses focus. On key press is used when the user presses the key. What is anonymous personalization? Anonymous personalization helps and allows the user to personalize the site before identifying themselves. For example, enable anonymous identification by passing the value true. Provide the cookie name, cookie timeout and cookie path. And set cookie sliding expiration as true. And keep the cookie protection encrypted and cookieless is equal to user. What is form-based authentication? Form-based authentication is used to edit the web configuration files and add a login page to authenticate. It is used for web applications. Form-based authentication also provides a way to handle authentication using custom logics in ASP.NET applications. Define the types of configuration files. Configuration files help to manage the settings of a website. Settings of configuration files are stored as XML files which are separate from the application. Configuration files are of two types: web configuration and machine configuration. Web configuration contains the machine-specific value for all settings of the applications. Machine configurations help to extend, restrict, and override the settings. List the different types of cookies used in ASP.NET. Cookies are a small piece of information stored at the client side. The cookies in ASP.NET are provided into two types: session cookie, valid for a single session; persistent cookie, valid for multiple sessions. Explain the difference between custom controls and user controls. Custom controls is designed for a single application, whereas user control is designed for multiple applications. Custom control is loosely coupled. User control is tightly coupled. User interface can be changed in custom control, whereas in user controls, the user interface is fixed. Explain the difference between web configuration and machine configuration files. Web configuration is automatically created when an application is created, whereas machine configuration is automatically installed with the Visual Studio. In web configuration, file inherits settings from the machine configuration, whereas in machine configuration, only one machine configuration exists. We will start with the beginner level ASP.NET MVC interview questions and answers. What is MVC? MVC is a software architectural pattern that divides an application into three major components. MVC stands for Model, View, and Controller. The model represents the shape of the data and stores the data that it retrieves from the database. View is a user interface used to represent the data of the application as tables, charts, and diagrams. It also communicates with model and controllers easily. Controller. The controller in MVC holds the user's request. It handles the HTTP request made by the user. Explain the lifecycle of MVC. Lifecycle is a series of steps used to handle the request to change the state of the application. The lifecycle of MVC is divided into two categories: application lifecycle and request lifecycle. Application lifecycle runs the IIS application until it stops. The request lifecycle handles the HTTP request of the application. List the advantages of using MVC. MVC has a lot of advantages with building the application. Some of them are: MVC provides separation of components that allows the reuse of applications across the several platforms. MVC allows applications to change features like layouts, fonts, and colors without affecting the entire architecture of the application. MVC uses asynchronous techniques to build applications that can be easy for a developer to build application in a faster and secure way. What are the actions, and list a few of them. Action methods in MVC execute the request and generate the response. Actions have one-to-one mapping with the user. Here is a list of few of the actions. Content result, it returns a string. File path result, it returns the file path content. File content result, it returns file content. JavaScript result, it returns the script for execution. JSON result, it returns JSON formatted data. View result, it helps to receive a response for the view engine. And file stream result, it returns file content and redirect to result, it helps to redirect to the specified URL. What are action filters, and list the types of action filters? Action filters are attributes that apply to the controller or a controller action that helps in modifying the executed actions. MVC framework includes several actions. Some of them are output catch. Output catch catches the output of a controller at a specific time. Handle error. Handle error handles the error when it executes an action. Authorize. Authorize enables you to restrict access for a control. What are action verbs? Action verbs are HTTP requests applied to the action methods to work for HTTP request methods. Some of the action verbs are HTTP post, HTTP get, HTTP put, and HTTP delete. What are code blocks in MVC? Code blocks in MVC are used to enclose C# statements. This is an example for code blocks. It starts with the symbol @ and encloses with curly braces. Code blocks work with loops and keywords in different ways. What are helpers in MVC, and list the types of helpers? Helpers in MVC are HTML classes that help to create HTML control programmatically. HTML helpers in MVC generate HTML and result as a string. Some of the different types of helper methods that ASP.NET provides are create links. Create links is to get the information from the routing tables. Create inputs. This helps to create text boxes and buttons. Create form. Handle post back to an action on a different controller. What are non-action methods? Non-action methods are attributes used when a public method in a controller does not want an action method. Here is an example that shows how to create a non-action method in MVC. What is model binding? Model binding in MVC allows mapping the HTTP request data with the models using the data sent by the browser in an HTTP request. Model binding also acts as a bridge between the HTTP request and C# action methods. Using model binding, it automatically transfers post and get into a specified data. Explain the process of validation in MVC. Validation in MVC is used to check the user input and provides a set of validation that is easy to use and powerful to check the errors of the user. What is a partial view? Partial view is a view that is rendered from the another view, which helps to break the larger view into smaller views. A partial view is also used to reduce the duplication of the common markup content across the markup files. What are logic layers? The logic layer defines and decides the information needed to solve the assigned problems. Logic layers in MVC are divided into three types: business layer, display layer, and input control layer. What are the drawbacks of MVC? There are many advantages and disadvantages of using MVC applications. You will now understand some of the disadvantages of using them. MVC is not suitable for large type applications. The complexity of the applications is high using MVC. It is difficult to understand the design pattern in MVC. Deployment of applications is hard compared to the other applications. What are file extensions for Razor View? Razor is a view engine used to write the mix of HTML and server-side. It is also a general-purpose template engine that does not provide any ties to the MVC, which allows the creation of view engine inside the application. Razor in MVC contains Razor Markup, C#, and HTML. File extensions of Razor View are divided into two types: .cs HTML used for C#, .vb HTML used for Visual Basic. What is an unobtrusive AJAX? It is a progressive enhancement that focuses on the delivery of the content. AJAX calls in unobtrusive AJAX, which are made through built-in helpers to eliminate the need to add the blocks of code. What are get and post actions? Get in MVC is used to request the data from a specific resource. It is the most common HTTP method. Below is the syntax of get action. Post is used to send data to the server to create and update a resource. Below is the syntax of post action. Now let us look at intermediate level interview questions. What is a Razor? Razor is a view engine used to write the mix of HTML and server-side. It is also a general-purpose template engine that does not provide any ties to MVC, which allows creating a view engine inside the application. Below is the syntax. In C# it is .cs HTML. In Visual Basic it is .vb HTML. What is exceptional handling in MVC? Exceptional handling in MVC is used to execute the action methods using try and catch blocks. It is the process for responding to the exceptional condition for the special processing. For example, here in this program, you will create an exception for the application that shows an error on the web page that displays a custom error message or custom error pages. What is a layout view? Layout view in MVC allows creating a common site template that inherits multiple views to provide a consistent look for an application. The layout view has the same extension as the other views, which you can store in the shared folder. ASP.NET MVC layout allows the child views using some methods, like render section method and render body method. What are web APIs? Web API is a platform used to build RESTful applications using .NET frameworks that include small and large applications for devices, tablets, and mobile devices. Here is an example for web APIs. This is a basic program to add the configuration of web API in the configuration folder of the MVC application using the name web API config. What is form authentication in MVC? Form authentication in MVC is responsible for users' credentials like sign up, sign in, login, and logout. It also provides a way to handle authentication using custom logics in ASP.NET applications. You can do form authentication using the SQL database to provide the user credentials and information. It is used to edit the web configuration files and add a login page to authenticate. Explain Bootstrap and its use. Bootstrap is a front-end framework tool used for web applications to build a user interface using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It was first developed by Twitter developers for personal use and became popular with the designer and developers with flexibility. Bootstrap provides all pieces of layouts, menus, fonts, widgets, and other many features. You can find Bootstrap files in the Solution Explorer as bootstrap.css and bootstrap.js. What are Glimpse in MVC? Glimpse in MVC is a free and open source Nugget platform used to perform operations like performance, debugging, and diagnosis for the applications. It allows users to find information about every action by the server, including the Azure test in the application. List the types of action results in MVC. Action result is an action method used along with an action. It is the result of action execution. The action result is a return type. Action results are divided in MVC into three categories: status result, content returning result, and redirection result. Status result provide the status of the code to the browser. Content returning result is responsible for returning the content, and redirection result redirects the specified URL. What is a request lifecycle? Request lifecycle is a sequence of events that occur when the application handles the HTTP request. Request lifecycle involves 5 steps: routing, MVC handler, controller, action invoker, and result execution. Routing is used to map the incoming URL to the router and creates request content and sends it to the next layer. MVC handler is responsible for creating the controller instance. Controller is used to deal with the request and implement the controller interface. Action invoker is used to execute the action method sent by the controller. Result execution is responsible for the execution of action method in the controller. Explain the ways of adding the constraints to a router. Constraints to a router in MVC are added in two ways: using the object that implements the router constraint interface, or using the regular expressions. Explain routing in MVC. Routing is the process of mapping the browser request to the controller and responding back. Router handles the information and URL patterns in routing, and it stores all the configured files to the application in the routing tables. Routing in MVC is divided into two types: convention-based routing and attribute-based routing. This is an example of registering the routing with different custom routes using the name default. The default maps with the URL pattern in the routing table. What is output caching? Output caching is responsible for improving the performance of the application. It also enables you to remove unwanted actions. Below is the example for output caching. Mention the benefits of areas. Areas in MVC allow to organize the models, views, and controllers into a separate function in the application like billing, support, etc. Let's see some benefits of using areas in MVC. Using areas, it is easy to perform unit testing. It allows you to separate the functional sections of the applications. It also helps in communicating with the other areas by creating another area. What is a view start? View start is introduced by a view engine that applies to all views automatically. Below is an example for view start. What is attribute routing? Attribute routing is a type of routing that provides more control over the URL by defining routers directly on the actions and controller in the application. Some of the advantages of using attribute routing are: it reduces the chance of errors in the application. It is easy to map routes pointing to the same action. It provides more control over the URL. How to change the action names in MVC? The action name attribute is used to change the action name in MVC. Explain data annotations. Data annotations in MVC are responsible for providing the instance checking for the client side. MVC provides various data annotations. Some of them are: required is used to indicate the property of the required field. String length is used to indicate the string length. Bind is used to include or exclude the binding parameters. Email address is used to value the email address. What is the difference between MVC and web forms? MVC is based on a design pattern that helps to create the application faster. Web forms are based on functions and code behind. MVC provides HTML helpers to create the controls, whereas in web form, every control in web form has server control. MVC is used to create partial views, and web forms are used to create user controls. There is no view state in MVC. View state in web forms is used to maintain the state. It is easy to use jQuery, JavaScript, and CSS in MVC. Web forms use a little jQuery and JavaScript. Differentiate between view bag and view data. View bag is used to transfer the temporary data from the controller to a view. View data is used to transfer data from the controller to the view. View bag is a type of object, whereas view data is a key value collection. View bag is slower than view data, and view data is faster than view bag. View bag works only on .NET 4.0 and above. View data works on .NET 3.5 and above. View bag is used as dynamic, so no need for type conversion, whereas in view data, type conversion is required. Explain scaffolding in MVC. Scaffolding is a technique used as code generation for ASP.NET Web applications. It also generates code for CRUD operations using the Entity Framework models. It reduces the time and generates clean code while creating the application. It is automatically installed in Visual Studio 2013 and above versions. Explain the difference between temp data and view bag. Temp data is a key value collection, whereas view bag is a type of object. Temp data is used to pass data between two consecutive requests. View bag values becomes null. Temp data works during the current and subsequent request. View bag works only at the current time. Temp data works on .NET 3.5 and above. View bag works with .NET 4.0 and above. Explain the difference between render page and render body. Render page is a layout page that contains content filled by the other pages, whereas render body is a method of master page or Razor commonly used as a layout page. Render page is obviously present in the layout view. Render body doesn't have a fixed path. Render page does not include any parameters, but render body always includes the parameters like boolean. Multiple methods are not allowed in render page. Render body allows multiple methods. List a few rules of Razor syntax. Razor is a view engine used to create web applications by combining the features of MVC. There are certain rules to be followed for the Razor. They are: Razor block having C# are enclosed with curly braces. Variables are always declared with the var keyword. Variables and functions with inline always start with the symbol @. C# file has an extension of .cs_html. Code statements always end with semicolon. Now let us look at the advanced level interview questions. What are bundling and minification? Bundle is a logical group of physical files used to improve the performance of the application by providing the inbuilt features bundled into a single file, which improves the performance using HTTP request known as bundling. This program below shows all the bundles of CSS files present in the folder of bundling. Minification is a technique of removing the unnecessary comments and characters from CSS and JavaScript to reduce the size to improve the performance of the application. Below is the example of minification. It alerts if the number is even or if the number is odd. What is JSON binding? JSON binding is known as JavaScript object notation binding that supports MVC3 using JSON value provider factory. It allows action methods to accept and model bind data in JSON binding. This is a simple program that shows how to bind data using JSON binding. What is cross-domain AJAX? AJAX cross-domain sends a request to refresh the URL domain of the web pages. There are many ways to implement and use the cross-domain AJAX. The most commonly used cross-domain AJAX are send JSON pre-request and cross-domain resource sharing. Explain the usage of remote validation in MVC. Remote validation is the process of validating specific data posting to a server without posting the entire data to the server. This program on remote validation helps in checking the validation of the user using the parameter username and that displays the message name already exists. List the standard HTML helpers in MVC. Standard HTML helpers in MVC are used to render the HTML controls like label, text box, password, checkbox, etc. Some of the standard HTML helpers in MVC are HTML text box. It is used to create a text box. HTML password. This is used to create a text box with password identity. Next we have HTML checkbox. It is used to create the property in the checkbox. HTML radio button. It automatically displays the property in the radio button. Explain the implementation of AJAX in MVC. AJAX is asynchronous JavaScript and XML client-side script that communicates to the database without any need from the postback. It also speeds the response time in the application. Below is the syntax of AJAX in MVC. Explain about MVC model binders. Model binders in MVC allow mapping HTTP request with the model. It works when a user requests the data from the browser to the controller. At this time, model binding works on middleman to map the incoming request with the controller action method. Update model method function observes the request and updates the model class. This program is process of adding the controller with the index action method to the MVC. Explain areas in MVC. Areas in MVC allow organizing the model, view and controllers into a separate function in the application like billing, support, etc. It is mainly used for large applications. When the developer or user is working with the area, it is important to register with the areas. The syntax for registering the areas is as follows. In this, each MVC has its own area folder that allow it to keep controllers, models and views separately. Explain the roles of presentation, abstraction and control in MVC. Presentation, abstraction and control is an architectural pattern that separates MVC interactive system into three types of components. Presentation. Presentation in MVC is responsible for formats of the visual and audio presentation of the data. Abstraction is responsible for retrieving information and processing the data. Control handles the flow of control, the communication between two components. Explain the uses of keep and peek in MVC. Keep in MVC is used to preserve the data of temp data after the value is read. Peek in MVC is used to read the value in temp data without clearing the data. Here are some differences between keep and peek. Keep provides two overloading methods, whereas peek provides no overloading method. Once the data is read by the keep, then the data is erased. The data in peek remains the same after the operation is successful. In keep, redirect to result and redirect to route result are called to get the items back. In peek, there is no action called by the peek internally to retrieve.